the name of this painting is The Appearance of Clemence Isaure to the Troubadours. In 1909, H. Spencer Lewis, the founder of AMORC, was standing before this painting in an exhibit hall called the Hall of the Illustrious in the City Hall of Toulouse, France. He was gazing upon this painting, and a man walked up to him, and H. Spencer Lewis spoke to this man, and he said, "Pardon, monsieur, I believe I am addressing a gentleman who has some information for one who is seeking light." And the man replied to H. Spencer Lewis. He said, "Yes." And he asked H. Spencer Lewis why he chose to study this painting in particular. And H. Spencer Lewis replied, "Because it seems so beautiful, so wonderful, and expresses what I believe. I see in it a very mysterious meaning, a symbol of," and then H. Spencer Lewis never says what it is a symbol of when he shares this experience that he had, but he responded to the person who asked him why he was standing in front of this painting. He told him, "I see in it something very mysterious." And the person that he was speaking with was the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians of Toulouse, France. Most likely this was Clovis Lassalle, who was a well-known photographer and mystic in Toulouse. And this man gave H. Spencer Lewis a note with instructions on what he should do next. And this led to H. Spencer Lewis's initiation in the nearby village of Old Toulouse, which is just outside of Toulouse. And H. Spencer Lewis was initiated by the imperator of the Rosicrucians of France, and he accepted the responsibility to establish the Rosicrucian Order in America. We're going to talk a little bit about this amazing journey that he took. In 1908, H. Spencer Lewis was interested in mysticism and psychic research, and he participated in a church in New York City where he lived, and it was called the Metropolitan Church of New York. And this is a photograph of the church at that time, and here's a photograph of it today in New York. And H. Spencer Lewis was very involved with this church. The minister of the church was a man named Samuel Parks Cadman. He usually went by S. Parks Cadman. And he was a very dynamic individual who mentored H. Spencer Lewis, who was a young man at this time. And S. Parks Cadman eventually became well known for being the first minister to use radio to reach a broad audience. And every Sunday, he transmitted a radio message to people in the area. So he encouraged H. Spencer Lewis to go within when he would come into the sanctuary in the church. And this is what it looks like today. The Metropolitan Church was also known as the Church of the Open Door, and today it's known as the Church of the Village. And this is what it looks like today. H. Spencer Lewis in 1908 was seated in a pew, and his experiences are described in detail in a book written by his son, Ralph Lewis. The book is called Cosmic Mission Fulfilled, and it's the biography of Ralph Lewis's father, H. Spencer Lewis. So H. Spencer Lewis would sometimes imagine himself in the place of S. Parks Cadman, speaking to the congregation and feeling inspired as S. Parks Cadman was a very inspirational speaker. And then H. Spencer Lewis would also go on his own. And one time he was sitting here by himself, and a spiritual being presented itself to H. Spencer Lewis and told him that what you're seeking, you're not going to find in books. And it inspired him to seek out the Rosicrucians. However, H. Spencer Lewis didn't know the Rosicrucians. Here was a 24-year-old man in New York. He wasn't from poor family. He wasn't from a family with a lot of wealth. He was just like a middle-class person in New York who's been inspired to seek out the Rosicrucians, and he has no idea where to start. However, he had received shortly before then a catalog of books from a bookseller in Paris. And probably this bookseller was Louis Privat. And this is a modern photograph of the Privat Librairie or bookstore in Paris. And they're all over France. This is now a very well-known publishing company. And this person told him that you may find it helpful on your search if you come to Paris. But H. Spencer Lewis had nowhere else to go to find the Rosicrucians, so he wrote the person who had sent him this catalog of books. And that person wrote back and said, you may find what you're seeking if you come to Paris. And again, there was this young man in New York in a totally different time in history who wasn't thinking about going to Paris. But a week after this experience, H. Spencer Lewis's father asked him if he could accompany him to Paris. His father, Aaron, was a genealogist and had been engaged by a member of the Rockefeller family to do his genealogy. And they had done it for a number of years. H. Spencer Lewis's father, Aaron, and his mother, Catherine, had gone to Europe on many occasions. His father spoke French fluently and his mother spoke German. But his mother was not able to go in the year after this happened. In 1908, H. Spencer Lewis had this experience. Then his father asked him a week later if he could go with him the next time that he was going to Europe to do this genealogy research, and that was in 1909. So H. Spencer Lewis found himself in Paris, and he met with the bookseller. H. Spencer Lewis never names who this person was, and we think it probably was Louis Privat, and you'll find out why in a few minutes. So H. Spencer Lewis was doing the genealogy research, and people would come upon H. Spencer Lewis and hand him notes, leading him to the next place to go in his search for the Rosicrucians. And he described that he would say, like there was one time that there was a woman who was cleaning a hotel room, and he said the words Rose Croix to see if she responded. And people were coming from all different places to give him notes or give him messages on the next step in his path to find the Rosicrucians. After some time in Paris working with his father, his father said that the next step that they needed for the genealogy research would take them to Toulouse. And this is the city hall in Toulouse. And just before H. Spencer Lewis's father had said that their next step would be going to Toulouse, H. Spencer Lewis had received a message that said, you need to go to the south of France. And all along the way, he was told not to share this with anyone. He had shared with his wife that his desire to find the Rosicrucians, but he did not share with anyone any of these steps along the way. So H. Spencer Lewis and his father traveled to Toulouse in the south of France. And this is where the Hall of the Illustrious, this art gallery is. It's the city's art gallery in this beautiful building, their city hall. So H. Spencer Lewis was standing in front of this painting when he had that experience with the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians of France. And this is a woman named Clemence Isaure, which means golden Isis. And she is holding a charter to these troubadours out in the forest. And the three muses are behind her. And next to her is a statue of Minerva, who is a perpetuation of the Egyptian goddess Isis. And we'll learn more about this in a few minutes. So this is Clovis LaSalle, the man who met H. Spencer Lewis in the Hall of the Illustrious and handed him the note to take him to the next step in his initiation. H. Spencer Lewis drew these two sketches. The one on the right is the location of where H. Spencer Lewis was initiated. And this is what that building looks like today. The fountain and statue in the center have been replaced with a swimming pool. The chateau on the right here in modern times is owned by an individual family. The building where H. Spencer Lewis came to had not been used for initiations. Remember, this was in 1909, had not been used for initiations since the 1860s. And there was a group that was still perpetuating the Rosicrucian tradition of their fathers and their grandfathers. And the temple was on the second floor of this chateau, but it was on the second floor of the chateau. And H. Spencer Lewis described his experience when he was there. He said that he entered the main entryway and a man seemed to appear out of nowhere and led him to 3 rooms, which were 3 steps of his initiation. And then there was a 4th room where H. Spencer Lewis laid down and went into a dreamlike state where the spiritual being who had inspired him to seek out the Rosicrucians appeared to him again and walked him through those 3 rooms again while he was in this dreamlike state, giving him his true initiation, which was on the mystical plane. So the person walked him through the 3 rooms saying, well, you know, here's the first room and here's what the meaning of the first room is and the second room and the third room. But it wasn't until H. Spencer Lewis laid down and went into another state that this spiritual being walked him through his actual initiation. And I had the great privilege of being allowed to enter this chateau. And when you enter the building, there is a walkway here, and you can see on that second floor behind the railing, there is a hidden door that it looks like someone appears out of nowhere. And behind that hidden door are these 3 rooms that H. Spencer Lewis described, and then a 4th room where he rested and went into another state and had this mystical experience of initiation. H. Spencer Lewis wrote to his wife the next day, "All my hopes on this trip have been realized, but not without many tests and trials. At last I am in the R+C. Thank God. But the test and vows are severe. But the oaths and vows are severe. How many in America will I find to keep them with me. So this was the experience of H. Spencer Lewis being initiated into the Rosicrucian tradition. And after this, he met with the person who had met him in front of the painting of Clemence Isaure, who again we believe was Clovis Lassalle, the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians of Toulouse, and the imperator of the Rosicrucians. And they asked him to reinvigorate the Rosicrucian Order in America. The order has had other cycles in America, and they asked him to begin this next cycle in the year 1915. And H. Spencer Lewis agreed to do that. Now, why was this area of Toulouse so important to the Rosicrucians? There are a number of reasons, and one is that it is especially associated with the sacred feminine. And this is often represented through Black virgins or Black Madonnas that are in different sites throughout this part of France. Toulouse is in an area called the Languedoc, and this means langue means the language, and oc means the Occitan, and the word oc meant yes. So the Occitan is this part of the world that is now considered to be southern France, but it was its own country before that. France was up north, and the Languedoc down south was not part of France at that time. And this Black Madonna that is in Toulouse is associated with the figure we've spoken about already, Clemence Isaure. So at this cathedral in Toulouse, it's called Notre Dame de la Dorade. It was originally the first Visigoth temple in Gaul. So the Visigoths were a Germanic tribe, and this was originally on a temple dedicated to Minerva. So that was in the year 410 of our era. And I mentioned that Jean Donahue has written an article for the Sacred Feminine Digest, and here's what she shares with us regarding the secret of the Black Virgin. The Black Virgin stands at sites where adherence to the teachings of Our Lady and Mary Magdalene once gathered and perhaps still do. Sometimes called the Other Church, Church of Light, or the Cathar Church of Love, they indicate the presence of Gnostic and initiatory teachings. Their sacred knowledge flowed from the Egyptian mystery schools, the Essenes, the ancient temples of love, through the Greek mystery schools and the Isis cults that lingered alongside the Druids, to an amalgam of Gnostic sects. Worshippers of the Black Virgin believe the human soul fell from paradise into matter in the far past, and that human consciousness was split. The divine feminine is consciousness that is of divine potential, heaven, and the divine masculine is consciousness that is of the material existence, earth. The sacred feminine seeks reunion with its earth-bound consort, the divine masculine. This is called hieros gamos, the divine marriage of these two potentials, which is also described as the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz and our longing for a reunion with the divine. So the Cathars were extremely powerful in this part of what is now France. The Cathars were Gnostic Christians who began in this part of the world in the middle of the 11th century. And they were unique in that they allowed equal rights for women and men. They were tolerant of all religions, and they shared their wealth. They lived communally. And the French king in the north wanted their land, and the Roman Catholic Church wanted their followers, and both of them wanted their extreme wealth. So an inquisition began against the Cathars, who are also sometimes called the Albigensians. And the inquisition in the Roman Catholic Church was established specifically to wipe out the Cathars. It eventually led to the extermination of other people, and it began in order to kill the Cathars, and then the Catholic Church and the King of France would split their wealth, and the King of France would take the land. And if a Cathar would not convert to Roman Catholicism, they would be killed. So the Inquisition began in the year 1234, and there were many years of persecution. And in the year 1244, a small group of Cathars who were still left, there were 235 people who were still left, Cathars, who went to the top of this mountain at Montségur, and they ran out of water and food, and they knew that their end was near. And they asked if they could have 2 weeks in order to meditate. And they prepared themselves, and they came down around the time of the spring equinox in 1244. And rather than convert to a religion that they didn't believe, the Cathars were very devout Christians. And instead of converting, 235 people threw themselves into the fire that was waiting for them at the bottom of Montségur that we see here. And there were a couple of other little places where the Cathars continued, and it's said that a few people escaped out of the back of Montségur, which seems impossible because when you look down, it's a cliff straight down. So after this, the Cathars had to continue very discreetly, and there were a couple of other little places, but for the most part, it's believed that the Cathars were no longer able, that the Cathars were finished at Montségur. And the Inquisition didn't just persecute the Cathars, they also persecuted Jews and anyone else who wouldn't convert to Roman Catholicism. In the year 2016, the Roman Catholic bishop for the area around Montségur apologized for what he called acts contrary to the gospel. And this was a healing ceremony. Many people participated in this, and they went to the exact site where the 235 Cathars were burned. So this is this tradition of the Black Madonna, of the Cathars, the Gnostics, and they were all perpetuating these ancient mysteries. So after this, of course, it wasn't safe to say that you were a Cathar. And there was a group that arose that was called the Troubadours. And the Troubadours existed in the Middle Ages. They were French poets who composed songs and poetry in a dialect of this area. And they existed in the 11th to the 13th centuries. Now, it seemed that they were singing about the love of a man for a woman. And a big theme was courtly love. But if you look behind the deeper meaning, they were singing again of our love for the divine and our desire for a reunion or union with the divine. So in the year 1323, 7 troubadours organized a group called the Gai Savoir, which means happy knowledge. And publicly, they said that the purpose of this group was to make the world a happier place and a better place through poetry. But you can see that through their music and their poetry and their singing, they could go from town to town singing about the ancient mysteries without being persecuted. So after the persecution of the Cathars, where it was no longer safe to practice the religion of your choice, the troubadours sprang up, and they were singers who would go, singers and poets who would go from town to town singing these songs. And then in the year 1323, 7 of them created this group called the Gai Savoir. And they sent a letter to all of the troubadours in the area, inviting them to a poetry contest. And in May of 1324, this poetry contest was held. And they had 7 judges. Now, again, when the troubadours were singing and sharing their poetry, they were speaking about, seemed like, courtly love. Every time, though, and you can see the artwork from this period, they would show the woman was perpetually young. Here she is as a young woman with a young man. And then you see her as a young woman with a middle-aged man, but she's still young. And then you see her as a young woman with an older man. So this is the perpetual divine feminine, the sacred feminine that they're seeking about, that they're singing about. This painting is in the hall of, this painting is in the city hall, the Capitole in Toulouse, and it shows that first contest in the year 1324. So you can see that this is a very rich part of Toulouse's history. So the poetry contest awarded prizes. The first prize was a violet, which was considered to be a symbol of the highest mystical degree that we can achieve. So the flower, a violet, was given to the winner. And then second place was a marigold, which is philosophical gold. And third place was the wild rose. And even today, you can see in cemeteries, there are many tombstones that have the violet, the marigold, and the rose, which are again part of the Gai Savoir and these contests of poetry that sing about courtly love, but more than that, that sing about our deep desire for reunion with the divine. And this is seen as through the sacred feminine. So this now brings us to Clemence Isaure. And Clemence means mercy, and Isaure means the golden Isis. This is a statue of Clemence Isaure. And some people believe that she actually lived in the late 1400s to the mid 1500s. Other people believe that she is a mythical character who didn't actually live. But the sacred story about Clemence Isaure is that there was a troubadour who loved her. And after the death of her troubadour love, she took a vow of chastity and silence. But before she did this, she gave an endowment to the city of Toulouse to reestablish the Gai Savoir, because by this time in the 1500s, they were no longer allowed to exist. So she gave an endowment so that these games could be, these contests could be reestablished. And at this time then, it's a new group called the Jeux Floraux. And the Jeux Floraux, it's the flower games, again, referring back to the violet, the marigold, and the rose. And Clemence Isaure symbolized noble action. Here is a woman who, at the death of her beloved troubadour, takes a vow of chastity and silence and gives all of her money to the city to perpetuate the previous contests. She also symbolizes beauty and wisdom, especially inspired through poetry. Mostly, though, she represents the perpetuation of the ancient mysteries, specifically the ancient mysteries associated with the sacred feminine and with the goddess Isis. So her tomb, it is said, was found in that same church that I mentioned earlier that has the Black Virgin in La Dorade. And this is, again, on the site of the first Visigoth temple in Gaul, on a previous temple dedicated to Minerva, who is a perpetuation of Isis. And the Academy of the Jeux Floraux, the Academy of the Floral Games, still exists. It is an active organization in Toulouse. And we had the opportunity on some of our Rosicrucian journeys to France, when the Rosicrucian Order organizes journeys to France. We have visited the meeting place there, and we've held meditations in this place. And this is the doorway to the Hotel Aziza, and their meeting place is there. And whenever you see this door knocker that looks like this was a place where the mysteries were perpetuated in the Languedoc. So if you see a door knocker like that, and this one is on the door to the place that now houses the Jeux Floraux, it is indicating that the mystery, it is a hidden symbol of the mysteries being perpetuated here. Now, this is a photo of a group that's very much associated with the Jeux Floraux and with another group, the Rosicrucians of Toulouse, that I'll mention in a moment. This is a photograph of the Archaeological Society of Midi. And Midi is a region in France. And in the center here, the person that you can see with the frame around him, that is Louis Prévat, the person who wrote to H. Spencer Lewis and suggested that he come to France if he was seeking the Rosicrucians. A few years ago, we took this photo in that exact same location. And Ingrid, there you are at the top there, and there's Amy and Marie and Mike and a number of people who are on the call here today, with our former imperator, Christian Bernard, and next to him, his wife, Soror Hélène, and next to them, Grandmaster Serge Toussaint of France, and a number of Grandmasters are in this photo. So we went to this same location. This was the group, this was where the group met that invited H. Spencer Lewis to seek out the Rosicrucians in Paris. If he wanted to find what he was looking for, he may find it helpful to come to France. Now, the Rosicrucians of Toulouse sponsored the Salons de la Rose Croix, which were presented from 1892 to 1897. And these were salons, these were gatherings that included art, music, and Rosicrucian rituals. And the core group was from Toulouse. The salons themselves were presented in Paris. Tens of thousands of people participated in these every year. And the director was Joséphin Paladin. And he is associated with the Rose Croix of Toulouse and the different groups that I mentioned, including the archaeological, including associated with members of the Archaeological Society of Midi. So that brings us to this painting. This painting was created by a man named Henri Martin. And in it, you can see that Clemence Isaure, this character who asked and created an endowment so that the troubadours' wisdom could be perpetuated, and the troubadours were just perpetuating much older wisdom. She is holding a charter to troubadours in the forest. You know, they would go from town to town. And this is the charter of the Jeux Floraux, of the group that she reestablished. And on the charter, it includes a rose and a cross. And for those of you who are familiar with the colognes in our tradition, or if you participated in the Vestals teleconference, you can see that Clemence Isaure is dressed like a colombe or a vestal, and she is perpetuating the ancient mysteries. Again, this is a detailed image of the painting that H. Spencer Lewis was standing in front of when the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians of France directed him to his next step in his initiation. This is Henri Martin, the painter of the painting called The Appearance of Clemence Isaure to the Troubadours. There is a hall in so the Capitole is the name of the city hall in Toulouse. Within that is this magnificent art gallery, and it's called the hall, is an art gallery. This wing is all dedicated to the artwork of Henri Martin. And I am so impressed with his work. He went through different stages when creating art, and he was a symbolist painter. And this is the symbolist painters. The Salons de la Rose Croix, the Rosicrucian salons from 1892 to 1897, really helped to perpetuate the symbolist movement, which was an important art movement. And it was very personal. It was the artist's experience of dreamlike states that they would have had, or of mythology. So this hall includes 4 huge paintings by Henri Martin. And I just want to show you some of the artwork here. Here are these sheep, but I took a close-up photo to show you the detail of his work. That is how he created, with just tiny, tiny, tiny little strokes, those sheep. He was a magnificent artist. And this is a painting that he did of Clemence Isaure. It's not the one that H. Spencer Lewis was standing in front of. Again, for symbolists, mythology and their personal experiences were really important to them. Here is the painting that H. Spencer Lewis was standing in front of. And this was set up because our group was officially welcomed by the city of Toulouse when we came to visit, in front of this painting by H. Spencer Lewis. So you can see it over to the left. H. Spencer Lewis was standing right there. And here is another view of that painting. And another one. And then it was after that that it led to his initiation. And this is the letter that he sent to his wife, Molly, after having been initiated. Now, H. Spencer Lewis was instructed to reestablish the Rosicrucian tradition in the United States, and he agreed to do that. This was in 1909. And in 1913, his wife Molly died. It was complications from a ruptured appendix. And H. Spencer Lewis had a son, Ralph, who was 10 years old, and a daughter, Vivian, who was 6 years old. And he met this woman, Martha Morphier, and he married her the following year. And she was instrumental in the creation of the Rosicrucian Order AMORC. Another woman who was instrumental was named May Banks Stacy. When H. Spencer Lewis agreed to start the Rosicrucian Order in the United States in 1915, he was given some documents and some ritual objects. And he was told, you are going to meet someone else who will complete what you need. And he met May Banks Stacy. She said that she had something for him. Her son was an army captain, and she traveled with him to India, where she met the Rosicrucians there. And then she traveled to Egypt, and they gave her a jewel. And we have this jewel, this Rosicrucian cross, in the library, the Rosicrucian Research Library in San Jose at Rosicrucian Park. So he was told that he would meet others who would add certain papers and devices. And May Banks Stacy was in New York. She met with H. Spencer Lewis, and she told him that I have some things for you. And she gave him what he needed in order to start the Rosicrucian Order AMORC in 1915. And Martha, his wife, she contributed in every way you can imagine. I serve as the secretary of the Supreme Grand Lodge, and I have the great privilege of being able to see our historic records at Rosicrucian Park, including the meeting minutes. And Martha Lewis was so involved in creating the Rosicrucian Order. And in fact, when it came time to initiate the first person into the order, Martha Lewis was chosen for that honor. And May Banks Stacy, who we see here, H. Spencer Lewis always credited her as the co-founder of AMORC. So in the year 1915, 9 fratres and sorors created the Rosicrucian Order AMORC in New York City. And again, Martha Lewis, this is a photo of her years later. And she wasn't only involved until H. Spencer Lewis's transition in 1939. She stayed involved after her stepson, Ralph Lewis, became the imperator too. And she, from the minutes, it was clear she was a very practical person. When something needed to get done, she was behind the scenes, making sure it got done. H. Spencer Lewis would travel, he'd have these visions, and he'd come back. An example is, and this is recorded in the minutes, he was in Germany and he saw a planetarium. And he came back and he said, this was fantastic, and I'd really like to create a planetarium at Rosicrucian Park. And within a year, a planetarium was created from H. Spencer Lewis's vision and determination, and from Martha Lewis's very practical implementation, making that happen. She also, when AMORC was just getting started, she shared part of her inheritance that made it possible that AMORC could be established. So there were 2 women who were essential in the creation of the Rosicrucian Order AMORC. And this is H. Spencer Lewis. He was unanimously chosen to serve as the first imperator of the Rosicrucian Order AMORC after it was established in 1915. And he continued, he dedicated his life so profoundly until his transition in 1939. And we're going to practice a meditation now. I invite you to sit relaxed. Take 3 deep breaths, becoming more relaxed with each exhalation. And just take a few moments to consider how so many people's lives were improved, transformed, how so many people have benefited because H. Spencer Lewis took action based on the mystical experience that he had in the Church of the Open Door in New York City, began in 1908, which led him to France to stand in front of that beautiful painting of Clemence Isaure appearing to the Troubadours. The artist was inspired to share his personal experience and the mythology of Clemence Isaure, who perpetuated the ancient mysteries, especially those associated with the sacred feminine. And let's just take a moment to give thanks to all the people who conspired, let's say conspired, to make it possible for us to benefit from the Rosicrucian teachings today. People in the ancient mystery schools in Egypt, and those that were perpetuated through all the different traditions. Isis, who later became Minerva. The Gnostics in the Languedoc. The Troubadours who sang their sacred stories. Clemence Isaure, who created an endowment so that they could continue. The Rosicrucians of Toulouse, who in a hidden way guided H. Spencer Lewis to stand right in front of that painting of Clemence Isaure and be led to the final steps of his initiation. To H. Spencer Lewis's later wife, Martha, to Maybank Stacy, who played such essential roles in the creation of AMORC. And to every Rosicrucian who has made it possible for us to experience the Rosicrucian lessons and tradition. So mote it be. Fratres and sorors, thank you so much for participating in this reminder of the august tradition that we make up today. There is no Rosicrucian order outside of us. It is us. May we ever be aware of the sacred light with which we have been entrusted. So mote it be.